Now let's go on to the second question. So I want to guess which one you're going to go for, Mac, but I don't want to don't want to bias you. You can't pick though. You can't pick the same one. So you have Chief Rocka, Can't Knock the Hustle, OPP, Mama Said Knock You Out, Money Ain't a Thing. Which of these five do you like?
I might surprise you with this one, Marcos, but I'm gonna have to go with "Can't Knock the Hustle."
Okay. I love it. I thought you were going to go with Mama Said Knock You Out, honestly. So, Can't Knock the
Cause you
Hustle.
can't knock the hustle.
But until the late thing, I'm the one who's crazy. 'Cause that's the way you're making me
She
feel.
can't knock
Oh
the
man, I love Mary J. Blige on that whole track, man. Being from New York too, I always have a little bias there. But Can't Knock the Hustle. I love this question because this is really, I think, a real persistent topic. We probably have 1,000 entrepreneurs and startups thinking about this right now. What is your best pricing advice for startups? All right. So thinking about your early stage, right? You're probably still finding product market fit. You don't want to say no to a deal. You're trying to get some kind of traction. You're checking out your cash balance is low. You're working out of the garage. I mean, all the things, right, that we know in startup life. So Mac, I know that in your firm that you work, you invest a little bit more down the road than startups, but I know you work with them and I know you got that entrepreneur spirit in you. So what's your biggest and best advice for a startup that wants to get pricing right?
Yeah, absolutely. And the reason I picked this is, it's something I'm super passionate about, right? Because I think what happens a lot of times in startups is pricing can easily become kind of a back burner topic. But I think the biggest piece of advice at high level that I have is, start now, right? If you're a startup, use pricing to your advantage. Pricing is not just a profitable growth lever, but pricing is a growth lever just more broadly and in general. I had a CEO say to me one time, and this was a little bit of a bigger business, right? But the CEO said, pricing is something I think about on a Friday afternoon. And in my head, I was like, that's crazy to me because pricing is easily one of your best levers from a customer acquisition perspective. It's your best lever from a market positioning perspective, right? And if you're a startup, I think one of the pieces of advice that I can give is think to future company self, right? What do you want your process to look like around pricing? What do you want your pricing to look like ultimately? But you should constantly be thinking about pricing as you're acquiring customers and gaining market share. You can price yourself in a market in a situation where you continue to gain market share, but eventually once you've gotten, that certain mass of customers, pricing is going to be your best lever to make sure that you're not pricing yourself out. You're continuing to acquire the types of customers you want to acquire. As all of us know here, pricing touches every discipline across your practice. From a sales and marketing perspective, how do you market pricing? How do you put pricing out there? How do you think about it? But pricing can also give you a lot of legitimacy when you're going up and you're winning some of these bigger logos and bigger customers. Even if you are a startup, you don't necessarily need to, bend over backwards necessarily just because you're a startup, right? Price to the value that you believe your product has. And if you're, the founder startup, the value of that product because that's the reason you went out and built that product. So maybe to kind of summarize, I think it's be passionate about pricing and price passionately about the product and the value that you deliver to your customer base, and don't necessarily give on concessions just because you're necessarily a startup. But I also think be future looking and think about what do I want my pricing to look like, and that's where I should start building the infrastructure for today.
Yeah, I think that is sound and sage advice. Let me put on my devil's advocate hat for a minute, right?
Oh,
Because
let's hear it.
it makes total sense. But I need to eat food. Okay. I need to eat food. And in order to eat food, I got to get this deal. I got to get them to sign and I got to get them to pay me, which is probably a whole nother, set of gymnastics you got to do. But I got to get the sign. They're asking me to discount 40% off my list price, which I don't want to because I really believe in my value. But if I don't sign, I'm not going to eat. Right.
Yeah.
And so there's this kind of natural, Maslow's like order hierarchy going on here where it's like, I got to do what I got to do. And while I think it makes a lot of sense to price for the true value, you're going to get a lot of people who would want to, but feel like they can't, if you know what I mean. So,
Yeah.
Johnny Samway in here, like, I feel like there's somebody there who's struggling. Like, how do I maintain the value? How do I do this? I feel like my stuff's worth, $50 a user or $100 a channel, whatever it is. And I'm now trying to win my first few customers and they're asking me for all these discounts. What do I do? What do you guys think? Like, have you Have you ever seen that scenario, heard of that scenario?
Yeah. So I'll give you two answers. Okay. I'll give you the answer that any pricing advisor should give you, which is you have to sell on value. You have to really believe that the customer is going to see that value. And so they will pay according to what that is. However, I will say this. I've talked to plenty of just super young startups, just trying to get off the ground. And at that point, I just say like, do anything unnatural just to get the business, which includes discounting, unfortunately, right? And so there's one answer where it's like, I know it's the go-to answer that every pricing advisor has. And there's the other one where it's just a reality, right? Like you don't have any business, you're starting to run out of runway. At that point at that point you have to discount and you have to be competitive as well, right? So you have to look at what competitors are pricing. You have to look at where you are. You don't have a name. You haven't built a brand for yourself. You haven't developed that trust. You don't even know if the pricing that you're going to give is going to get you laughed out the door, right? And so at that point, I feel like, when the rubber hits the road, you kind of have to for these young companies, right?
Yeah, it's true. And doing what you got to do, right? Basically is what you're saying. And I want to hear Sam's point of view on this one too, but it's like doing what you got to do. But, I'm thinking about the next, several deals, the next step, the next release, like all those key things, right? And when you're in startup mode, there's where you are now and where you're going to be in 2 or 3 years is going to be probably a very different place than where you are now, because that growth curve is pretty sharp. And so thinking about that and maybe Johnny, like a way to recover from some of those unnatural things, right? Could be like setting an expiration on the discount, putting some conditions around the discount. Say, yo, you know what? Yeah, I'll give you the 40 off because and I'm going to reward you for being an I don't know, early adopter or whatever you want to call it, right? And then, but we're going to have to meet every month or every 2 weeks or whatever it is. I want feedback. I want to know what's working, what's not. Believe it or not, customers will do it. They'll like sit there and they'll tell you like, here's what I love, here's what I hate. Because it almost feels like they're influencing the roadmap or influencing the path of the product. And so they'll do it. And so if you put some conditions around it, expiration around it, you might be able to recover from it. But if you don't, you might be stuck with a bunch of companies that may not be willing to pay you what you're worth in some degree, right?
Very true.
And, I mean, are we off here? Is there another way to help these startups like capture that value that Mac was talking about, but deal with the reality?
Yeah, value is interesting. Value is subjective. So there's what you believe your value is, and there's what the market believes what your value is, right? And one of the things I would always advise startups to, a couple of things. One is have a very expansive view of value that you're providing to your customers, not just strictly defined by your products and services. As Johnny and Marco, you kind of allude to, your brand has value, your reputation has value, right? So, are those going to be a incremental value add to kind of your ability to sell, or is those going to be a discount to your ability to sell? And those value changes over time as you gain reputation in the market, as you do these things. So view every sales opportunity, every opportunity as a data point, as a data point that you can gather, right? So that's probably kind of, for the very early stage startup, do what it takes and just track these things and be ready to be humble over and over and over again and learn from it. And, Johnny sort of, and Marco, you also allude to this, right? The other thing I always sort of try to advise startups that I talk to and advise and founders that I advise is that, know your product roadmap and know where those inflection points is. So you sort of mentioned this expiration date, right? So those expiration dates tend to align with certain inflection point of your company. Your pricing model or your pricing, can scale you to 10x maybe at that point, or your roadmap starts expanding. Is it going to break at that point? If it breaks at that point, is that the way to kind of reset a customer's expectations and go from there, right? So know where these inflection point is, plan for that 10x, 100x, growth and plan ahead. Cause the third thing I always try to advise people is like, don't skimp on the operation. Retooling your company on a new sales motion, on a new business model is also always really hard. So know when things is going to break and know when those are, that's, those times and that journey of your company where you need to hit that reset button.
Yeah, that's really smart, man. That's especially about aligning those expirations with those inflection points. Because I'd like to run this by you guys too, because there's this thought I've always had, which is in the beginning stages, you're you have to learn before you earn, right? And I think in some of that, you shouldn't really expect, and all you startup folks out there, right? More power to you. You're probably coming up with super innovative stuff. I've been talking to a lot of AI companies too about this. And it's like, it's probably good stuff, right? But you said it really, really well, Sam. It's like what you think the value is, what they think the value is may not match at that stage, right? So you gotta learn, how do we get more proof behind it, and that proof kind of helps kind of prop up the value a little bit better. It also may even uncover like, shit, I actually think this is even more valuable than I thought, right? It could even work in a lot of different ways. But as you're building up to that, like these stair steps, what ends up happening is your product gets better. You get better at delivering it. You also get better at communicating it. And then that customer, or those customers that help you, this is where, again, I wasn't really downing that other person who gave me those quotes, but it was just really like, look, there's a time in a sequence that you have to go through to earn that value and earn the ability to capture that price. And that's the chasm that you have to cross. That's all like the crazy stuff you have to do, unnatural things you have to do, right, Johnny? Or like to get it to work. And that's where you wear your badge of honor and you can stand and say, this is what we charge for this value and you're going to love it. And that's from my point of view, software is always like a promise of value. Like you actually don't get any value until you actually install it, use it, all that stuff. So if you're able to then fulfill that, you're also able to fulfill your ability to capture that value later. So I do little tricks like, hey, I'll give you the discount, but you got to do a case study for me, or you got to, give me this or be a referral or whatever it is, because it's really about that learning cycle. Also, what Max said about feedback loops and just having a few feedback loops in there to help you as you're building up, and maybe even informing, say, guess what? My next roadmap, my next major release has enhancement XYZ that you said, and that gets them excited, then moves them up and so on. And then so the new business, you can start taking the price up and up. You can also have decoys, which is like, hey, here's our basic and here's our premium. I'll tell you what, I'll give you the premium for the basic price. And now what you're doing is you're setting up that you're actually paying less than what you should, but that's okay, right? And so there are a number of things you can do, but I always try to keep the door open later. So Sam, like Johnny, Mac, I think those were really solid points for any startup trying to figure out, like, how do I deal with pricing in the early days? We always say you got to know it, you respect it and do it. But then there's, I need food on my plate that kind of takes over that.